Hello and welcome to Gloomy Realm. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that carry you into forgotten places and shadowed corners of the night, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body grow still, and allow the noise of the outside world to slowly fade away. Tonight, a door opens to a darker place, a place where strange stories linger long after they're told. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and let yourself wander into the gloomy realm.
Story 1. My name is Toe, and until recently, I thought I lived in one of the safest places in Florianpolis. My neighborhood is one of those urban areas people fight to get into. It is clean, expensive, and full of people who care a lot about appearances. The streets are well lit, cameras sit on almost every corner, every building has security rules, and every house looks like it belongs in a real estate ad. There are guards at certain entrances, motion sensors near driveways, and enough surveillance systems to make you feel like someone is always watching. At first, that made me feel safe. Actually, it made me feel safer than I had ever felt anywhere else. There was something almost unreal about it, almost dystopian, if I am being honest. Everything was too controlled, too monitored, too perfect. But when you live alone and come home late every night, you learn to appreciate things like coded locks, cameras, and silent streets. The idea that nothing could happen there became part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or locking my car. My life was simple, almost painfully simple. From Monday to Saturday, I woke up at 6:20 in the morning. I would get out of bed, shower, get dressed, eat something light, and leave home at 8. My workplace was about 30 minutes away by car, depending on traffic. I worked for a car company as an inside salesperson and junior consultant. It was not a bad job. In fact, I liked it more than I expected to. I liked talking to clients, explaining features, comparing models, and helping people convince themselves they needed something more expensive than they planned to buy. But the job demanded a lot from me. Most weekdays, I did not get home until close to 10 at night. By that hour, I was usually running on nothing but coffee, stress, and the hope of getting into bed as quickly as possible. I would park the car, walk to my front door, type my password into the keypad lock, step inside, shower, eat whatever was easiest, and get ready to sleep. That was my life. 6 days a week. Wake up, work, come home, enter the code, go inside, sleep, repeat, nothing unusual ever happened. Then one Tuesday night, while coming home from work, I noticed something on my front door. At first, I thought it was dirt. There was a dark smear near the center of the door, slightly to the right of the keypad. It was black with a faint brown edge, like someone had dragged a dirty thumb across the surface. It was not large, maybe the size of my palm, but it stood out because the door was new. I had replaced it a little over a month earlier for aesthetic reasons. The old one was scratched and ugly, and the new one had a clean, dark finish that matched the rest of the house. That smear had not been there before. I was sure of it. I stood there for a while, staring at it under the porch light. I tried to remember if I had touched the door with greasy hands. Maybe a delivery person had leaned something against it. Maybe rain had pulled grime down from the roof. There had to be a normal explanation. I was too tired to care. I typed in the code, waited for the lock to beep, and went inside. The next morning, the smear was still there. In daylight, it looked stranger. It was not just black. There were shades of brown in it, and the edges seemed uneven, almost soft. The shape reminded me of dried smoke or old ink bleeding into paper. I thought about cleaning it off, but I was already running late, and for some reason, I left it alone. I told myself I would deal with it later. That evening, I noticed it again when I got home. Still there. Still dark. Still waiting. I cannot explain why I did not clean it. Maybe it was because I was exhausted. Maybe it was because part of me found it interesting. The way the colors mixed together was oddly beautiful, like some strange little stain made by accident, but arranged with purpose. It looked ugly if I thought of it as dirt, but if I stared long enough, it almost looked like art, so I ignored it. The days passed. My routine stayed the same. Wake up, work, come home. Code, shower, food, bed, but the smear became part of that routine. Every morning when I left, I looked at it. Every night when I returned, I looked again. At first, it was just a quick glance. Then it became something more. I would stop for a few seconds before entering the code, studying the mark in silence. I told myself I was only checking whether it had changed. The problem was, after a few days, I became certain that it had. The smear was growing, not quickly, not in a way I could prove by taking a photo and comparing it hour by hour. It was subtle. The edges stretched outward little by little. The darker parts gathered in strange lines. The brown areas faded into gray. There were patterns forming inside it, though I could not tell what they were. At least, not at first. For 7 days, I watched it become something else. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it. I worked long hours. I came home drained. Sometimes I was so tired that I could barely remember the drive back. There were nights when I reached my front door and realized I had no memory of parking the car. I would simply find myself standing there, punching the code into the keypad like a machine. In another place, that kind of careless exhaustion would have made me an easy target. Someone could have followed me. Someone could have waited behind the gate. Someone could have pushed inside while I stood there half awake. But this was my neighborhood. Safe, monitored, protected, that was what I believed. Then my company offered me extra work. One afternoon, near the end of the day, my manager called me into his office. He said a few wealthy clients in a nearby city were interested in buying several high-end vehicles, and the company needed someone to help with the sales process. The job would take 2 days out of town. The pay would include a very generous bonus. I accepted immediately. Money has a way of making bad ideas sound reasonable. The morning of the trip, I woke up at 5. I packed a small bag, dressed quickly, drank coffee, and left while the sky was still gray. Before getting into my car, I gave the smear one last glance. It looked the same as before. A dark, shapeless mark on a clean front door. Nothing more. The business trip passed quickly. It was exhausting, but profitable. Rich clients always have endless questions, even when they already know they are going to buy. They want to feel important. They want you to stand there smiling while they take their time. I did what I was paid to do, and by Saturday evening, I was finally driving home. I arrived earlier than usual, around 6:40 in the evening. That should have felt nice. The sun had not fully disappeared yet. The neighborhood looked calm. The cameras watched from their corners. The lights were beginning to turn on one by one. Everything was normal. But the moment I parked, I realized I was not thinking about food or sleep or even the bonus I had earned. I was thinking about the smear. The urge to look at it was stronger than the urge to go inside. That disturbed me. Somehow, without noticing, I had built a habit around that mark. It had become something I expected to see, something I checked like a message on my phone. I walked slowly toward the front door, my bag hanging from one shoulder, and looked up. My mind went blank. The smear was no longer a smear. The dark, shapeless stain had changed into something with form. It looked like a figure, a thin, skeletal figure. Not the whole body. Mostly the upper part, from the torso to the head, leaning slightly forward as if it was trying to look out from inside the door. It had no hair. Its shoulders were narrow, its neck was too long. The head was round and bare, and where the eyes should have been, there were two wide, empty shapes. It still looked unfinished, like the first sketch of a painting someone had abandoned halfway through. The lines were not clear enough to say it was a person, but they were too clear to call it random dirt. I stood there with my hand near the keypad, unable to move. For a few seconds, I thought about taking a picture. Then, I thought about touching it. Then I thought about running my sleeve across it to see if it would smear. I did none of those things. I entered the code and went inside. That night, I barely rested. I tried to watch television, but I could not focus. I made dinner and forgot half of it on the stove. I showered and stood under the water until it turned cold. Every few minutes, I returned to the front door and looked through the peephole, even though the stain was on the outside and I could not see it properly from inside. Finally, curiosity won. I opened the door and looked again. The figure was still there, unchanged, silent, flat against the surface of the door. I told myself it was pareidolia. People see faces in clouds, animals in shadows, shapes in stains. It is normal. The brain wants to find patterns. I was tired, stressed, and probably making something out of nothing. But I did not sleep well. Sunday was worse. Because I had the whole day free, I had nothing to distract me. I cleaned the kitchen. I did laundry. I answered a few work messages. I tried to nap, but every task pulled me back to the same thought. The thing on the door. By afternoon, I found myself standing outside again, staring at it. The figure seemed more solid in daylight. It was still not a proper drawing, but the shape was impossible to ignore. The torso bent forward. The head tilted slightly down. The eyes were blank spaces, but they felt focused. Not detailed, not alive, just present. I wondered if someone had painted it there as a prank, but that made no sense. Who would do that in my neighborhood, under cameras, in a place where everyone was obsessed with security? And why my door? Why this strange, slow-changing stain? Monday came, and I forced myself back into routine. I woke up at 6:20, got ready, ate quickly, and prepared for work. I tried not to think about the door. I told myself I would call someone later to clean or replace it if necessary. Maybe it was mold. Maybe some chemical reaction in the paint. Maybe moisture trapped under the finish. There were explanations. There had to be. But when I opened the door to leave, I nearly jumped backward. The figure had eyes. Not empty shapes anymore. Eyes, they were faint, almost faded, but detailed enough to make my breath stop. I could see pale irises, the whites around them, and dark centers that looked like pupils. They had formed overnight, right inside the dark stain, and they were staring directly at me. I cannot properly explain how it felt. It was still just a mark on a door. It was flat, motionless, silent, but every instinct in my body reacted as if a living thing was standing inches away from my face, watching, waiting, learning me. I grabbed my things and hurried to the car. It took me about 2 minutes to drive away, and those were the longest 2 minutes of my life. I could feel the door behind me the whole time. I wanted to look back. I wanted to make sure the eyes were not moving. I wanted to see if the figure stayed flat against the door or somehow turned its head as I left. I did not look. I drove away. Work was awful that day. Not because of the door, though that stayed in my mind constantly. The real problem came near the end of my shift. My manager informed me that the wealthy clients from the recent trip were not fully satisfied. Apparently, our team had failed to meet some of their demands, and we needed to return to the neighboring city to correct the situation. This time, the trip would take longer. Much longer. I should have been happy. The company offered another bonus, even better than the first. I liked my job as much as a person can, like a job that drains their whole life, and extra pay always helped. But something about leaving again made me uneasy. I remembered the stain. I remembered the eyes. I imagined being gone for days while whatever was on my door continued to change without me watching. That thought made my stomach turn. Still, I agreed. Because that is what people do. We ignore the strange thing because work is waiting. We push fear aside because bills exist. We tell ourselves nothing will happen because the alternative is too ridiculous to accept. That night, I got home close to 10, as always. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. My headlights swept across the driveway as I parked. The cameras near the street blinked with small red lights. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then stopped. I walked toward the front door. Then I froze. The eyes were still there. In the porch light, they looked even clearer. The figure had more shape now. The shoulders seemed sharper. The head leaned forward more than before. The face was still unfinished, but those eyes were complete. They did not look painted. They looked trapped, like something dark and hairless was pressed just beneath the surface of the door, staring out through a thin layer of wood and paint. I stood there for a long time with my finger above the keypad. For one horrible moment, I imagined the eyes shifting toward my hand. They did not move. I typed the code and went inside. The next morning, I left for the business trip. I did not look at the door. At least, I tried not to. But just before stepping into the car, I glanced back. The figure seemed closer to complete. I told myself that was impossible. I drove away anyway. I have been away for 10 days now. The company put me in a hotel while we handled the clients. The work has been tiring, but that is not why I am writing this. I can handle rude rich people. I can handle late nights, long meetings, and fake smiles. I can handle exhaustion. What I cannot handle is what the security system sent me 3 nights ago. Because of the strict neighborhood rules, every house is connected to motion sensors and cameras. If something unusual happens while a resident is away, an alert is sent to your phone. Usually, it is nothing. A cat crossing the driveway. A delivery worker. Rain confusing the sensor. At 2:13 in the morning, I received an alert. Motion detected at front entrance. I opened the footage immediately. At first, the camera showed my front door in black and white night vision. The porch was empty. The door looked clean from that angle, but I knew what was there. I leaned closer to the phone, trying to see the figure on the surface. Then the image flickered. The door changed. or something stepped away from it. I watched a tall, dark, bald thing separate from the front of my house. That is the only way I can describe it. It looked as if the stain had peeled itself off the door and become solid. A humanoid shape stood on my porch, thin and skeletal, with long arms and a hairless head. Its body was dark, almost black, but not like clothing, more like wet shadow. Its eyes were enormous and pale, too large for its face, reflecting the infrared light from the camera. It stood there for several seconds. Then it turned toward the keypad. I watched it lift one long hand. Its fingers were thin and wrong, bending too smoothly, like they had more joints than they should. Then it entered my password. My password. Not a random guess. Not one wrong attempt. The correct code. The lock beeped. The door opened. The thing stepped inside my house. I have watched the footage at least 50 times since then. I keep hoping I missed something. A mask. A costume. A trick of the light. A person in dark clothes. A burglar who somehow knew my code and happened to look like the figure that had been forming on my door for weeks. But every time I watch it, I see the same thing. A dark, bald, humanoid creature with huge eyes entering my password and walking into my home. The cameras inside the neighborhood show nothing leaving afterward. The motion sensors have not detected it coming back out. My front door remains closed, locked from the inside. I have called security. They said they checked the outside of the house and saw no sign of forced entry. They offered to call the police, but I told them to wait because I did not know how to explain what I saw without sounding insane. I tried calling my own house phone, even though I almost never use it. No answer. I tried checking the indoor smart devices, but most of them are offline. Yesterday, at 10 p.m., the keypad registered activity again. Not from outside, from inside. Someone or something touched the lock from the other side. It did not open the door. It only entered my code. Again, as if practicing, or reminding me that it knows. I am still in the hotel. My bags are packed because the work trip is supposed to be over, but I have not checked out. My manager has called me twice asking when I plan to return. I told him I was sick. That was not exactly a lie. I have barely eaten. I have not slept for more than an hour at a time. Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing stepping out of the door like it had been growing there, waiting for the right moment to become real. I do not know how I am supposed to go home. I do not know if it is still inside. I do not know what it wants. All I know is that for weeks I thought I was looking at a stain. But maybe it was looking back. And maybe the whole time, while I stood there exhausted after work, entering my code night after night, it was not just watching me. It was learning how to get in. Story 2. I am writing this here because the local authorities have given up on finding my mother. They will not say it that clearly, of course. They use softer words. They say the search is ongoing. They say they are following all possible leads. They say cases like this sometimes take time. But I have watched the way they look at me now. I have heard the tired voices on the phone when I call for updates. I have seen the detective avoid my eyes when I ask what else they are doing. The search is over for them. They dragged the retention ponds nearby. They sent volunteers walking in lines through fields and wooded areas around the county border. They put up flyers on every utility pole in town. Those flyers are still there, but the sun has faded them, and the rain has made the paper curl at the corners. My mother's face is still on them, smiling from a photo taken years before any of this happened, but most people have stopped looking. The official story is simple. They believe my mother developed sudden dementia. They believe she left the house in the middle of the night, confused and afraid, then wandered too far in the dark. They think she became lost somewhere outside the normal search area and died from exposure or an accident. They are wrong. My mother did not wander away. Something took her. I am writing everything down exactly as it happened, step by step, because I need someone to recognize the signs. I need someone, anyone, to tell me they have heard of this before. I need someone who knows how to track the thing that came out of the ground and disappeared wearing my mother's skin. I lived alone with my mother for 5 years before she vanished. I moved back into my childhood home after her body started to fail her a little. She was not helpless, but her knees were bad, and stairs had become harder for her. The house needed care, the yard needed work, and she hated asking neighbors for help. So I came back. At first, I thought it would feel strange to return to the house where I grew up, but it became normal faster than I expected. Our life was quiet. We ate dinner together. We watched television in the evenings. She read books in her chair with a blanket over her knees. I handled the heavier work around the house, and she still managed her own bills, her bank account, and most of the small decisions that made her feel independent. Her mind was sharp. That is important. She was not confused. She did not forget names or leave the stove on or lose track of what year it was. She remembered tiny details with almost cruel accuracy. If I told her I would fix a loose handle on Saturday and forgot, she would remind me on Sunday morning before breakfast. If a neighbor told her something in passing, she could repeat it word for word weeks later. So when the police talk about sudden dementia, I know they are only choosing the easiest explanation. They did not know her. I did. The nightmare started on a Tuesday night in late October. I have always been a light sleeper. The normal sounds of the house do not bother me much. The furnace clicking on, the boards settling, tree branches scraping the siding in the wind, those sounds fade into the background. But sharp, unusual sounds wake me right away. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke to the sound of the back door deadbolt snapping open. It was not a soft sound. It was a hard metallic clack that seemed to travel down the hallway and hit my bedroom door. My eyes opened immediately. For a second, I lay still, listening, then I heard the back door move. Cold fear went through me. I threw the blankets off and got out of bed. The hallway was dark. The only light came from the moon outside, pale and thin through the kitchen windows. I walked quickly toward the back of the house, barefoot, my heart already beating too fast. The back door was wide open. Freezing autumn air rushed into the kitchen. The curtains beside the door moved gently in the cold breeze. Beyond the doorway, the porch sat under the moonlight, and the yard stretched away into darkness. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought was worse. "Mom?" I called. There was no answer. I stepped onto the back porch. The wood was so cold it stung the soles of my feet. Our backyard was wide and flat, mostly grass, ending at a tall wooden privacy fence. The moon was bright enough that I could see almost all the way across it. My mother was outside. She was in the dead center of the lawn. She was kneeling in the grass, wearing only her thin cotton nightgown. For one confused second, I could not understand what I was seeing. Then I ran down the steps and across the yard, calling her name. She did not look up. When I got closer, I saw what she was doing. She had torn through the top layer of grass with her bare hands and was digging into the dark, wet soil beneath it. She moved with a desperate, frantic energy. Her fingers plunged into the mud, clawed out handfuls of dirt, and threw them aside. Again and again, she dug like her life depended on it. "Mom." I shouted. Still nothing. I dropped to my knees beside her and grabbed her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold. I pulled her back, forcing her to turn toward me. Her eyes were open, but empty. Her pupils were huge, so wide that they seemed to swallow the color of her eyes. She looked through me, not at me. Her mouth hung slightly open, and her chest rose and fell in heavy breaths from the effort of digging. There was mud on her nightgown, on her arms, on her face. Her hands were black with soil. I kept saying her name, but she did not respond. When I pulled her to her feet, she did not fight me. That was almost more frightening than if she had. She became completely loose and obedient, like a sleepwalker in an old movie. I guided her across the lawn, up the steps, and back inside. She never spoke. She never looked at me. In the bathroom, I turned on the sink and washed her hands. Mud was packed under her fingernails. The skin around her nails was torn open, scraped raw and bleeding. I remember my hands shaking as I cleaned her fingers. She stood there quietly, still staring at nothing. I bandaged her hands and put her back in bed. The next morning, she remembered none of it. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bandages around her fingers with real horror on her face. I told her what had happened as gently as I could. I expected denial. I expected embarrassment. Instead, she began to cry. She was terrified. Not because she had gone outside, not because of the cuts. She was terrified because her own body had done something without her. She had no memory of getting out of bed, unlocking the back door, walking into the yard, or digging with her bare hands. We made an emergency appointment with her doctor that same day. The doctor listened to us, checked her vitals, tested her reflexes, asked her memory questions, and examined her hands. He told us it was adult-onset sleepwalking, likely brought on by stress or poor sleep. He used the word somnambulism, as if a longer word would make it less frightening. He prescribed a strong sedative and told us to keep the doors locked. For one night, I wanted to believe him. The medicine did nothing. The next night, at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, the deadbolt snapped open again. I had barely slept, so I heard it right away. I ran down the hall and found the back door open just like before. My mother was already outside, kneeling in the exact same spot in the yard. Her bandages were ruined, soaked through with mud and fresh blood. She was digging into the same hole, making it deeper. That was when the fear really began. It happened every night after that, always at the same time. At 2:59, I would sit in the living room with the lights off, staring at the digital clock on the microwave. The house would be silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then the number would change to 30, and I would hear my mother's bedroom door open. Her footsteps would come down the hallway. They did not sound like her normal footsteps. My mother usually walked carefully because of her knees. She moved slowly, with one hand often brushing the wall for balance. But during those nights, her steps were heavy and dragging, as if her body was being pulled forward by something invisible. She never looked at me. She would pass through the kitchen, unlock the back door, and walk into the cold. I tried to stop her the third night. I stood in front of the door before she reached it and told her to go back to bed. She kept walking. When I put my hands on her shoulders, she pushed forward with such force that I stumbled backward. I tried again the next night. This time, I wrapped my arms around her waist and held on with all my strength. My mother was an older woman who had trouble opening tight jars, but that night, she dragged my full body weight across the floor without breaking her pace. Her bare feet slid forward. Her hands reached for the lock. Her face stayed blank. It was impossible. After that, the only thing I could do was let her reach the hole. She would dig for 10 minutes, maybe 15. Then the strange energy seemed to burn out of her. When I pulled her away, she became limp and easy to guide again. I would take her inside, clean her hands, bandage them, and put her back to bed. Every morning was worse than the one before. She would wake up and see the damage. Her fingers became swollen and bruised. Her nails cracked and split. Some of the cuts reopened every night. I spent my days cleaning wounds, changing dressings, and trying to comfort a woman who believed her mind was breaking apart. By the end of the second week, I could not take it anymore. I went to the hardware store and bought a heavy-duty double-cylinder deadbolt for the back door. It needed a key from both sides. I knew some people considered those locks dangerous in emergencies, but I was past caring. I needed to keep my mother inside. That evening, after she went to bed, I installed the new lock. I tested it several times. It held perfectly. Then I locked it and hid the key inside an empty coffee can on the highest shelf of the pantry. I sat on the living room sofa and waited for 3 o'clock. The house felt colder than usual. At exactly 3:00, her bedroom door opened. Her footsteps came down the hallway, heavy and slow. She entered the kitchen in her nightgown, her arms hanging at her sides, her eyes wide and empty. She walked straight to the back door and grabbed the deadbolt. It did not turn. She twisted it again. Nothing. I stood from the sofa, and for one brief moment I felt relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. The lock had worked. The barrier had held. I thought I could simply take her arm, lead her back to bed, and finally break the cycle. Then she turned away from the door. She walked toward the kitchen island with stiff, certain steps. She opened the utility drawer and began moving her hands through it blindly. Tape, scissors, batteries, a screwdriver, old receipts, a box cutter. Then she pulled out a solid steel claw hammer. My relief vanished. "Mom," I shouted. I ran toward her, reaching for her wrist. She turned with terrifying speed and swung the hammer directly at the large glass pane in the center of the back door. The sound was deafening. The tempered glass shattered outward in a bright explosion of fragments. Pieces flew across the porch and glittered in the moonlight. Before I could grab her, she shoved herself through the broken opening. I screamed for her to stop. Jagged glass tore into her forearms and thighs as she climbed through. Blood soaked instantly into the white fabric of her nightgown. A long piece of glass cut deep into her arm, and I saw the skin open, but she did not flinch. She did not cry out. She fell onto the porch, pushed herself up, and marched into the yard. I fumbled for the hidden key, unlocked the door with shaking hands, grabbed a towel from the counter, and ran after her. She was already in the hole. She ignored the cuts. She ignored the blood. She pushed her injured hands into the cold mud and kept digging. It took me 20 minutes to drag her back inside that night. The next day, we went to urgent care. She needed 30 stitches across her arms and legs. When she fully understood what had happened, she broke down in the exam room. She begged me to tie her to the bed. She begged me to lock her in a room. She said she was afraid of herself. She said she did not know what she might do next. I did not know what to say. I brought her home, gave her the strongest dose of the sedative the doctor had allowed, and put her to bed. Then I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring through the ruined back door at the yard. The hole in the center of the lawn was about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep now. It looked ugly and unnatural, like a wound in the earth. For the first time, a thought formed clearly in my mind. This was not random. She was not wandering. She was not digging in different places. She was going to the same exact patch of ground every night. She ignored locked doors, injury, cold, and pain just to reach that spot. She was not confused. She was being directed. Something was under the ground, and she was trying to dig it up. Once that thought entered my head, I could not get rid of it. I needed to know what was there. I needed to understand what could pull my mother from her bed and force her to destroy her hands. I waited until Saturday morning. She was sleeping heavily from the sedatives. I checked on her twice to make sure she would not wake, then went to the garage. I took a heavy steel spade, a pickaxe, work gloves, and a small hand trowel. Then I walked out to the center of the yard. The air was cold. The grass was damp. The hole looked worse in daylight, full of dark mud, torn roots, and the marks of my mother's fingers. I stood over it for a long moment, feeling foolish and afraid. Then I started digging. The ground was hard. Beneath the topsoil was dense clay, thick and heavy, packed with roots and stones. I drove the shovel down again and again, lifting out wet clumps of earth. After an hour, I was sweating through my shirt despite the cold. My back ached. My shoulders burned. I made the hole wider so I could stand inside it and work properly. By the time I reached 4 feet deep, my hands were blistered inside the gloves. The air down in the hole smelled old, like stagnant water and sealed earth. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning on the shovel handle. I looked down at the dirt between my boots. There was nothing. Just more clay, more roots, more rocks. For a moment, shame washed over me. I was standing in a hole in my backyard, digging because my sick mother had dug there in her sleep. I was ruining the lawn and frightening myself for no reason. The doctor had probably been right. This was illness. This was stress. This was a tragic medical problem, not something buried under our home. I decided to stop. I raised the shovel and drove it into the ground one last time. The blade struck something solid. A sharp crack rang out from the bottom of the pit. The metal handle vibrated violently in my hands, sending a shock up both arms. I froze. It did not feel like a rock. Rocks give a dull resistance. This felt different. Harder, smoother, structured. I dropped the shovel and knelt in the dirt. I pulled off my gloves and began clearing the soil away with my bare hands. Something pale appeared beneath the clay. At first, I thought it was stone. Then I scraped more dirt aside and saw the curve of it. The surface was off-white, smooth in places and pitted in others. It looked porous. It looked old. It was bone. Not fresh bone. Fossilized bone. Heavy, ancient, and almost part of the surrounding earth. But bone all the same. My mouth went dry. I used the hand trowel and a stiff brush to clear more dirt away. Slowly, carefully, I followed the shape. The piece was larger than I expected. Then it connected to another. Then another. Within 2 hours, enough of the buried thing had been exposed for me to understand that it was not just one bone. It was a skeleton. A complete skeleton. It lay flat on its back, trapped in the clay beneath our yard. It was about the size of a tall adult human, but it was not human, not even close. The skull was long and sloped backward into a sharp crest. The chest was broad, but instead of normal ribs, it had thick overlapping plates that curved around the torso like armor. The pelvis was wide and strange. Then there were the limbs. 6 arms branched from the upper body in pairs along the sides of the rib cage. Below the pelvis were 4 legs, bent at harsh angles that made no sense for any animal I knew. The arms were worse. Each one had too many joints. Not one elbow, but several places where the bones could bend. The hands, if they were hands, ended in long, hooked fingers made of many thin segments. I sat in the bottom of that hole and stared at it, unable to breathe properly. It was shaped enough like a person to make my brain try to understand it as one. But every detail was wrong. It was a body made for movement that should not be possible. A body made for reaching, climbing, folding, and holding. A body from a world that did not belong to us. I covered the skeleton with a heavy plastic tarp and weighed down the corners with rocks. Then I climbed out of the hole, went inside, and scrubbed my hands and face until my skin hurt. After that, I locked myself in my home office and opened my laptop. I searched for hours. I searched every description I could think of. 6-armed fossil. 4-legged humanoid skeleton. Ancient multi-limbed creature. Fossil with plated ribs. Strange hominid remains. Prehistoric humanoid anatomy. I searched science articles, paleontology databases, museum archives, and news reports. Nothing matched. There were fake pictures, hoaxes, bad drawings, old myths, but nothing that looked like what I had found in my yard. So I went deeper. I searched obscure forums, abandoned websites, strange archive pages, and fringe archaeology boards. Most of what I found was nonsense. Conspiracies, fake giants, alien skeletons, people arguing about hidden history. I almost gave up. Then, just as the sun was beginning to set, I found an old link on a dead message board. The link led to a plain black web page with harsh white text. It looked ancient, like something built in the early days of the internet and forgotten. There were no menus, no author photo, no comments, just one page. In the center was a single image. It was a charcoal drawing on rough paper. My blood went cold. The drawing showed the skeleton in my yard, the long, sloping skull, the plated ribcage, the 6 arms, the 4 bent legs, the hooked, multi-jointed fingers. Every detail was there. Below the image was text written in broken sentences, with almost no formatting. The author called the creature a sleeper. According to the page, the sleepers were ancient beings that existed on Earth millions of years before humans. They were not animals, not in any normal sense. They were powerful predators, rulers of a world long before our kind appeared. The page said they had not died out. They had buried themselves deep in the earth, entering a state of stone-like sleep to survive changes in the planet. But even while buried, their minds remained active. The page described it as a psychic weight, a kind of pressure that spread through the ground around them. Most people never felt it, but sometimes, when a sleeper was ready to rise, it would reach into the mind of a nearby living creature. A vulnerable mind, a tired mind, an aging mind. The words on the screen seemed to blur as I read the next part. When a sleeper wishes to wake, it cannot move its stone body on its own. It needs labor. It needs a drone. It chooses a living host nearby and enters the person's dreams. The host will dig. The host will ignore pain, hunger, injury, and fear. The host will keep digging until the sleeper is exposed to open air. I sat there with my hands pressed against the desk, shaking. My mother was the drone. That thing had been under our yard the whole time. It had reached into her sleep and pulled her out of bed every night. It had used her hands, her bleeding fingers, her old body. It had been making her dig herself toward it. But she had been too weak. The ground was too hard. She had only managed inches at a time. Then I had picked up a shovel. I had done in one morning what it had been forcing her to do for weeks. I read the final lines of the page. Exposure to the atmosphere begins the waking cycle. Once the sleeper wakes, the psychic bond becomes permanent. It requires a living vessel. The drone will approach. The sleeper will remove the host's consciousness and wear the empty skin. For a second, I could not move. Then I ran. I tore open the office door and sprinted down the hall. My boots slipped on the kitchen floor. I grabbed the back door frame and rushed outside into the freezing evening air. The yard was dark now. I ran to the pit and looked down. The tarp had been thrown aside. The hole was empty. The fossilized skeleton was gone, not broken, not partly buried. Gone, there were no pieces left, no dust, no scattered bones, only the deep impression of its shape pressed into the clay, a perfect outline where it had rested for millions of years. A wave of terror rolled through me so hard I almost fell. I turned back toward the house. The broken back door stood open. All the lights inside were off. I ran toward the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time. Broken glass cracked under my boots as I crossed into the kitchen. The house was silent, not quiet. Silent, it felt as if the air itself was holding its breath. The pressure inside the house was wrong. My ears popped. My teeth ached. It felt like the air before a massive storm, heavy and charged with something invisible. I moved down the hallway toward my mother's room. Her door was closed. The brass handle was freezing cold under my hand. I opened it. The room was dark except for the weak glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. Her bed was empty. The blankets had been thrown back, spilling onto the carpet. My mother stood in the center of the room. No, she was not standing. She was hovering. Her bare feet were 3 inches above the floor. The hem of her nightgown hung motionless in the air. Her spine was perfectly straight, too straight, as if all the natural softness had been pulled out of her body. Her arms hung at her sides, but the joints looked wrong beneath the skin, loose and disconnected. "Mom?" I whispered. The sound of my own voice seemed tiny in that room. She turned toward me. Her body did not move like a human body. It rotated in the air, smoothly, as if fixed to an invisible pole. Then I saw her face. It was my mother's face. The thin gray hair, the lines around the mouth, the shape of her chin, the cheeks I had kissed as a child. But whatever looked out through her eyes was not my mother. Her eyes were open wide. They were glowing with a pale white light. It was not warm. It was not holy. It was cold, sick, and empty. The light filled her eye sockets and shone against the skin of her face. Her mouth opened. It opened too far. Her jaw dropped lower than any human jaw should. The skin at the corners of her mouth stretched, then tore with a wet sound. A whisper filled the room. It was quiet and deafening at the same time. It sounded like stone grinding under the earth, like rushing water in a deep cave, like radio static coming from miles below the ground. There were words inside it, but they were not words any human throat should speak. The sound hurt me. It vibrated in my teeth and behind my eyes. It crawled down my spine and into my bones. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel like prey. I stepped forward anyway. I do not know why. Maybe I thought I could still save her. Maybe some stupid, desperate part of me believed that if I touched her, I could pull my mother back from wherever she had gone. I reached out. The moment my fingers entered the space around her, the pressure in the room collapsed. There was a violent popping sound, like a giant vacuum seal breaking. The windows rattled in their frames. The curtains snapped inward as a sudden gust of air blasted through the room. I threw my arms over my face. When I lowered them again, my mother was gone. The light was gone. The whisper had stopped. The air was still. The space where she had been floating was empty. I tore the room apart. I opened the closet, threw clothes across the floor, crawled under the bed, and screamed her name until my throat hurt. Then I searched the whole house. Every room. Every closet. The attic. The basement. The garage. I turned on every light and checked places she could not possibly fit. She was nowhere. That was 32 days ago. Since then, I have not slept more than an hour at a time. I sit in the living room at night, staring down the hallway, listening for footsteps. I have told the police everything I can, except the parts that would make them lock me away. Even then, they already think grief and exhaustion have made me unstable. They searched the woods behind the house. They searched the nearby roads. They brought dogs. The dogs followed her scent through the back door and across the yard, but when they reached the edge of the empty hole, they stopped. They whined, lowered their heads, and refused to go closer. The detective in charge thinks I am a broken caregiver who lost his mother and invented a nightmare to explain it. He thinks she walked away while I was asleep. He thinks the hole in the yard was something I dug during a breakdown. He is wrong. I know what was buried there. I know what woke up. I have tried to contact the author of that old blog. I have sent message after message to the anonymous email attached to the page. None of them have been answered. Maybe the address is dead. Maybe the person who wrote it is dead. Maybe they know exactly what happened and are too afraid to reply. I am begging anyone who reads this. If you are an archaeologist, an occult researcher, a historian, or someone who studies the things official records leave out, please help me. If you have ever heard the word sleeper used this way, tell me. If you have ever seen a charcoal drawing of a fossil with 6 arms, 4 legs, a plated chest, and a sloped skull, tell me where it came from. Most of all, tell me where they go after they wake. Because somewhere out there, something is walking in my mother's body, and I need to find her. Story 3. It was October of 2022, and at that time, I was working as a medical equipment delivery driver in Pennsylvania. It was not a glamorous job, but it paid the bills. Most people think delivery driving means music, coffee, and open roads, but medical equipment delivery is different. It is long hours, lonely routes, late-night drop-offs, and the constant smell of rubbing alcohol, plastic tubing, and hospital cleaners soaked into the back of your clothes. Some nights I would drive for so long that the inside of my truck started to feel more familiar than my own apartment. That night had already been bad before anything strange happened. I had been running behind all evening. One patient's paperwork was missing. Another address was wrong. At one stop, I had to carry a heavy oxygen concentrator up 2 flights of narrow stairs while an old dog barked at me from behind a baby gate. By the time I finished my last delivery in Scranton, it was almost 1 in the morning. The air outside was cold and wet. Not freezing exactly, but the kind of damp cold that gets under your jacket and settles deep in your bones. The sky was black and low, and the streets were shining from earlier rain. I remember standing beside my truck after the last drop-off, rubbing my hands together and telling myself I just needed to get home. I should have taken the main highway. I know that now. But I was tired, and my GPS said I could save time by taking a backwoods road toward Wilkes-Barre. I had taken that route once before during the day. It had been quiet, narrow, and a little rough, but nothing too serious. At night, though, it felt like a completely different world. The fog started about 10 minutes after I turned off the main road. At first, it was just a thin mist hanging low over the asphalt. Then, it thickened so quickly that I slowed down without even thinking. Within a few minutes, I could barely see 5 feet in front of my truck. It was not normal fog. I have driven through plenty of bad weather before. This was different. It had a strange yellow tint, like old smoke trapped close to the ground. It did not drift across the road the way fog usually does. It moved in slow waves, curling and pulling back, almost like it was alive. My headlights did not cut through it. They just turned it brighter, making the road ahead look like a tunnel made of dirty milk. I lowered the radio until it was almost silent. I do not know why. Maybe I wanted to hear if anything was coming. But there was nothing to hear except the hum of my tires on cracked asphalt and the soft rattle of equipment cases in the back. About 20 minutes into the drive, the forest began to press in on both sides of the road. The trees were tall and black, their branches twisting together above me until they blocked out most of the sky. There were no houses, no porch lights, no gas stations, no other cars, just the road, the fog, and the trees. That was when I saw the SUV. It sat on the shoulder, half hidden in the yellow fog. At first, I only saw the shape of it, a dark lump angled strangely beside the road. As I got closer, my headlights slid across the broken windshield, and my stomach tightened. The windshield had been smashed inward, not cracked from an accident, not shattered from hitting a deer, smashed inward, like someone had stood in front of the vehicle and hit the glass again and again with a sledgehammer. The hood was dented. One tire was up on the soft edge of the shoulder, and the whole SUV was parked at a sharp, awkward angle, as if the driver had swerved hard to avoid something in the road. But there was nothing there. No hazard lights, no brake lights, no open driver's door, no person waving for help. Just a dark SUV sitting in the fog. My first instinct was to keep driving. Every part of me told me to press the gas and get out of there. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for a few seconds, I almost did it. But then I thought about where I was. Rural road. No signal half the time. Cold night. If someone was hurt out there and I drove past, they might die before anyone else came through. That thought was enough to make me curse under my breath and pull over. I left the engine idling. That was my first mistake. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me like something physical. It felt sharper outside the truck, and the fog wrapped around me right away. The world became small. My headlights were behind me, bright but useless, turning the fog into a glowing wall. Beyond that, the forest was just black shapes and silence. Too much silence. No crickets, no wind moving through the trees, no distant traffic, not even the sound of water dripping from leaves. Just my own breathing and the soft rumble of my truck behind me. I called out, "Is anyone there?" Do you need help? My voice sounded weak in the fog, thin and small, like the trees had swallowed most of it before it could travel anywhere. No answer. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The white beam looked dull and sickly in the mist. I moved closer to the SUV, stepping carefully because the shoulder was uneven and wet. Mud sucked at the bottom of my shoes. Hello? I called again. Anyone hurt? Nothing. When I reached the SUV, I leaned toward the driver's window and shined my light inside. The seats were empty. For half a second, I felt relief. Then I saw the inside of the car. The upholstery had been shredded, not torn randomly, like an animal had clawed at it in a panic. It had been sliced into long, neat strips. The fabric hung from the seats like strips of old skin. The dashboard was cracked. The rearview mirror was missing. The air inside the SUV smelled foul, even through the cold air and broken glass. Then I noticed the back door. It was cracked open. I stepped around the vehicle, telling myself not to look inside, but I looked anyway. The back of the SUV was full of shoes, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Old sneakers, high heels, heavy work boots, sandals, running shoes, tiny children's shoes with bright colors and little cartoon designs on the sides. They were all piled together from the floor to the back seats, and every single one of them was caked in fresh, wet mud. The smell hit me then. It was not just mud, it was blood. That sharp copper smell that gets into your throat, under that was something worse, something rotten and old, like a basement that had been sealed for decades with something dead inside it. I stumbled back, gagging, then a branch snapped behind me. It was loud and sharp, cracking through the silence like a gunshot. I spun around so fast my phone nearly flew out of my hand. The flashlight beam shook across the trees. Nothing, just trunks, branches, fog, and darkness. I stood there, barely breathing. Then I heard a voice. It came from just beyond the tree line, a man's voice, low, fast, and flat. It was whispering, but not like someone trying to hide, more like someone reading something to themselves. A list. Mike, Sarah, John, David, Mark. I froze. Mark, that was my name. My blood went cold in a way I had never felt before. It was like someone had poured ice water down my spine. I did not wait to hear another name. I ran back to my truck. The fog seemed thicker now. The ground felt uneven under my feet, like the road had shifted while I was standing by the SUV. I stumbled once, caught myself, and kept going. My truck was only a few yards away, but it felt impossibly far. When I reached it, I grabbed the driver's door handle and pulled. It did not open. I stared at the handle, not understanding. I had left the door open. I knew I had left it open. Now it was closed tight. Locked, I looked through the window. The engine, which I had left running, suddenly died. The dashboard lights flickered once, then everything went black. For one terrible second, I saw my own reflection in the tinted glass, pale and terrified. Then something moved inside the truck. A hand appeared on the steering wheel. It was pale and grayish, with fingers far too long and thin to be human. The nails were dark and dirty. The skin looked stretched tight over the bones, almost translucent in the weak light from the fog. I could not move. Slowly, with careful, painful patience, the hand reached down, picked up my keys from the ignition, and placed them on the dashboard, right where I could see them. My breath came out in thick, ragged clouds against the glass. Someone was sitting in my driver's seat. At least, I thought it was someone. The shape did not turn to look at me. It just sat there, perfectly still, both hands now resting in its lap. Its head was tilted hard to the right, almost touching its shoulder. The angle was wrong. Sickening, it looked like its neck had been broken and then pushed back into place badly. Fear turned into panic so fast that I started banging on the window. "Get out!" I screamed. "Get out of my truck." The figure did not move. I hit the glass again and again until pain shot through my hand. "Get out." Nothing. I fumbled for my phone to call 911. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it into the mud. I unlocked the screen and stared down at the signal bars. No service. Not even emergency SOS. Just the word "searching" at the top of the screen. That little word felt like a death sentence. Then the wrecked SUV behind me came alive. Its headlights flickered. On, off, on, off. It should have been impossible. The SUV looked dead. The windshield was destroyed. The engine was silent. But the headlights began to flash in the fog like camera bulbs. Each flash lit the road for less than a second. On, off, on, off. In one of those flashes, I saw something in my truck's side mirror. A man was standing directly behind me. He was tall. Too tall. His shoulders were wide, and his head hung forward slightly, as if he was listening to my breathing. His face was covered by a mask made of thick, filthy leather. The leather looked old and dark, stitched together from several pieces. At first, my mind tried to call it animal hide. Then another flash of light came from the SUV, and I saw the uneven color, the stretched texture, the dark seams. I realized I did not think it was animal hide at all. I did not think. I ran. I left the truck, the keys, the road, everything. I ran straight into the woods. Branches slapped my face and arms. Wet leaves slid under my shoes. The fog followed me between the trees, thick and yellow, but under the branches it became darker, almost black. I could hear him behind me. But he was not running like a normal person. His footsteps came as heavy, rhythmic thuds, then long silences. Thud, silence, thud, silence, like he was taking huge steps, or jumping great distances and landing with his full weight. I looked back once and saw nothing but fog and trees. Then my foot caught on a rotted log. I fell hard, face first, into a muddy ditch. Pain burst through my knee and shoulder. Mud filled my mouth. For a second, I could not breathe. I forced myself to crawl. There was a massive dead oak nearby, its base hollowed out by rot. I dragged myself toward it, pushed through wet brush, and squeezed into the hollow space inside the trunk. It was tight and black and smelled like damp wood, insects, and old earth. I pressed myself as far back as I could. Then I covered my mouth with both hands. I could hear myself sobbing through my fingers, and I hated myself for it. A minute later, he walked past. I saw him through the brush. He was huge, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. He wore old miner's overalls, tattered and stained with grease, mud, and darker things. The straps were stretched over his broad chest. His boots were heavy and black, but the mud around them seemed to move like something alive. He was not carrying a knife. He was not carrying a gun. He was holding an old silver tape recorder, the kind with real buttons. Play, stop, rewind. He stopped about 10 feet from my hiding place. The woods became deathly quiet. He pressed a button. A voice hissed from the small speaker. My voice, from only minutes earlier. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" My stomach twisted. The recorder played it again. Is anyone there? Do you need help? Again and again. Then he began to slow the tape down. My voice stretched and deepened until it no longer sounded human. The words became a low, ugly growl, dragging through the night like something coming from deep underground. Is anyone there? He stopped the tape. Then he lifted his masked face and sniffed the air, like an animal, like a dog catching a scent. I did not breathe. I did not blink. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. In that silence, the vibration sounded as loud as a chainsaw. The man's head snapped toward the dead oak. It did not turn normally. It twitched. A sharp, broken movement, like something had pulled his head with a string. Through the jagged holes in the leather mask, I saw where his eyes should have been. But there were no eyes, only black pits, not shadows, not empty sockets, something deeper than darkness. They seemed to pull the light out of the air around them. Looking into them made me feel like I was falling. The smell became unbearable. Wet earth, old leather, rot, blood. He knew where I was. I backed away deeper inside the hollow tree, but my boots crunched on dry leaves. The man began to laugh. It was not a human laugh. It did not come from his mouth the way laughter should. It came from somewhere in his throat, a grinding, metallic clicking sound, like gears turning with bones caught between them. I threw myself out of the hollow and ran. I do not remember choosing a direction. I only remember running until every breath felt like broken glass in my lungs. Branches tore at my jacket. Something sharp cut my cheek. I fell more than once. Every time I got up because I could hear that heavy sound behind me. Thud, silence, thud, silence. Eventually, the trees started to thin. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I saw a flickering neon sign in the distance. A motel. It was old and run down. The kind of roadside motel you only stop at when you have no other choice. The paint was peeling. Half the lights were burned out. The sign buzzed and flashed weakly through the fog. To me, it looked like heaven. I staggered out of the woods, crossed the cracked parking lot, and burst into the lobby so hard I nearly broke the glass door. An old man sat behind the counter. He was watching a television that showed nothing but gray static. He did not even look up. I stood there, panting, covered in mud, blood, and leaves. My hands were shaking. My jacket was torn. "Please," I gasped. "Call the police. There's someone out there. He has my truck. Please, you have to call the police." The old man slowly turned his head. His eyes were milky with cataracts, cloudy and pale. They looked dead, cold, like stones left at the bottom of a river. He did not reach for the phone. He looked down at my feet. Then he said, "You're delivery driver number 4 this week." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" I said. "What does that mean?" He stared at my shoes. "Number 4, he repeated. "Call the cops," I shouted. "Please." The old man raised one crooked finger and pointed toward a dark hallway beside the counter. "Lines are down," he muttered. "Fog eats the signal. Nobody gets calls out when the fog comes in." "That doesn't make sense," I said. He slid a room key across the counter. "You can wait in the room at the end of the hall until morning," he said. "Nobody goes out in the fog." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab the phone myself. I wanted to demand that he help me. But I was broken. I was cold, exhausted, terrified, and hurt. I could still smell the man from the woods. I could still hear the tape recorder playing my voice. I looked back through the lobby windows and saw only yellow fog pressing against the glass. So, I took the key. The hallway was narrow and dark, with old brown carpet and stained wallpaper peeling near the floor. Each room door had a brass number hanging crookedly from it. The room at the end of the hall was mine. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and slammed the door. Then I pushed a heavy dresser in front of it. The room smelled like dust, smoke, and old sheets. The carpet was stained. The lamp beside the bed flickered when I turned it on. There was a small bathroom, a cracked mirror above the dresser, and a bed with a thin blanket pulled tight over the mattress. I sat on the edge of the bed and took out the small pocket knife I used for opening boxes. It was not much of a weapon, but it was something. For about an hour, I sat there and stared at the door handle. I kept waiting for it to move. I kept waiting to hear those heavy footsteps in the hallway, but there was nothing. Slowly, my breathing began to calm. Then I heard scratching. Not at the door, under the bed. My body went stiff. The scratching was soft at first, a slow, careful dragging sound, like nails moving across wood. Then it stopped. A familiar click echoed through the room, the tape recorder. The old man's voice played from under the bed. "Your delivery driver number 4 this week." But it did not sound right. It was distorted, slower, rhythmic, like the words had been cut apart and put back together in the wrong order. "Your delivery driver number 4. I slid off the bed and backed away. My knife shook in my hand. In the corner of the room, I saw a pile of clothes I had not noticed before. At first, I thought they were just old motel blankets. Then I stepped closer and saw the color, the shape, the reflective strip on the sleeve. It was a delivery uniform. My delivery uniform. The name tag on the chest read Mark. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked down at myself. I was still wearing my clothes, my own shirt, my own jacket, my own pants, but the uniform on the floor was soaked in blood. Deep, jagged claw marks had been ripped across the back, tearing through the fabric like something had tried to open whoever wore it. I turned toward the mirror above the dresser. I needed to see my own face. I needed proof that I was still there, that I was still real, that this was not some nightmare my exhausted mind had built out of fog and fear. But the mirror did not show me. It showed the room, the bed, the dresser, the stained carpet, the cracked bathroom door. But I was not in it. I raised my hand. Nothing in the mirror moved. It was like I had become a ghost inside my own body. Then the hand shot out from under the bed. The same pale, long-fingered hand from my truck. It wrapped around my ankle. The grip was impossibly strong, like a steel trap closing around bone. Pain shot up my leg. I felt something in my ankle creak under the pressure. I screamed and stabbed down with the knife. The blade passed straight through the hand, like smoke. The hand tightened. I fell to the floor and grabbed at the carpet, trying to pull myself away, but it dragged me backward toward the dark space beneath the bed. The room seemed to stretch. The bed looked much larger than before. The space under it was no longer shallow. It was a black opening, wide and deep, smelling of wet mud and old leather. My phone fell from my pocket and lit up on the floor. One new message, unknown number. As I was dragged into the darkness, I caught just enough of the screen to read it. "Thanks for the new shoes, Mark. The fit is perfect." Then the black swallowed me. I do not know where I am now. It is dark here. Not just dark like a room with the lights off. Dark like being buried. The air smells like wet mud, old leather, rust, and something rotten that has been kept alive too long. Sometimes the ground beneath me feels soft, like soil. Sometimes it feels like carpet. Sometimes it feels like the inside of a car. I found a way to post this using a signal that comes and goes like a heartbeat. I do not know where it comes from. Maybe it is the same signal the fog eats. Maybe it lets messages out only when it wants to. The police told my family the motel I found burned to the ground 30 years ago. They found my truck abandoned miles away. It was parked at a strange angle on the shoulder of another back road. The windshield was smashed inward, and the cargo area was filled to the roof with shoes. I can hear the tape recorder again. It is somewhere in the dark with me. Sometimes it plays my voice asking if anyone needs help. Sometimes it plays the old man saying I was delivery driver number 4. Sometimes it plays voices I do not know. Men and women and children, all calling out into the fog. Tonight, it is playing something new. The sound of my own bones snapping, over and over. Every night, I feel hands reaching through the darkness and taking something else from me. First my keys, then my truck, then my shoes, then pieces of memory, little things, my apartment number, my mother's voice, the smell of sunlight on clean clothes. I think tonight they are coming for my skin. If you drive back roads in Pennsylvania and you see an old SUV sitting alone in the fog, do not stop. If the windshield is broken and the lights are off, keep driving. If you hear someone in the trees whispering names, do not listen for yours. And if you ever find a motel in the fog with a flickering neon sign and an old man watching static behind the counter, do not go inside. Because nobody leaves that road whole. And whatever is out here is always looking for something that fits. Story 4 Jake was holding the bottle with only 2 fingers. The other 3 rested loosely on the steering wheel. Every time the car hit a bump, those fingers lifted off, and every time they did, I stared at them, waiting to see if they would land back where they were supposed to. Twice already I had reached across to grab the wheel. Twice, Jake had slapped my hand away like I was annoying him. "This isn't driving school, mate," he said, his words thick and wet from alcohol. "Hands off." I pulled my hand back and muttered, "Idiot." Then I checked the map again. The blue dot on my phone floated in the middle of a dark green patch, surrounded by nothing but trees. No road. No side street, no thin gray line showing a dirt path. Nothing. "There's no road here," I said. "The map just shows trees." Malcolm leaned forward from the back seat and shoved his head between the 2 front seats. His breath smelled like cheap beer and smoke. "They don't update these things all the time," he said. "You really think they care what happens out here in little old Flockton? Maybe if they built a McDonald's here, Google would finally notice the place exists." "I could go for a McGriddle," Harry mumbled from the back. I looked over my shoulder at him. Harry's eyes were half closed, his head resting against the window. Earlier that night, I had watched him eat 4 pot brownies in Michelle's smoke room like they were cookies. I had no idea how much of the conversation he was actually following. Jake's free hand drifted out the open window again, slicing through the cold night air. When we left Michelle's house, he had seemed fine. A little drunk, sure, but not dangerous. Now, with every passing minute, he looked less like someone driving and more like someone pretending to drive while his body slowly forgot how. "Guys," I said, looking back down at my phone. We didn't drive down a dirt road when we came here. Yeah, we did, Harry said. At the house, yeah, that was their driveway. I enlarged the map and turned the phone around so he could see it. This big green patch, that's where the GPS says we are. There are no roads here. It's the middle of nowhere, Harry said. Of course there are no roads. Exactly, moron. Jake made a sound that was somewhere between a burp and a choke. The smell of beer and vodka rolled through the car. His eyes narrowed at something ahead. Bankstown? He muttered. Where the hell is Bankstown? That's the second time I've seen that sign. The car hit a deep dip in the road and jerked hard to the right. My stomach jumped into my throat. Jake yanked the wheel back. The rear wheels slid across the dirt, caught on a smoother patch, and kept going. The car hummed forward as if nothing had happened. I stared through the windshield. Hadn't we already passed a Bankstown sign? I remembered seeing it too, green and white. Metal, dirty, maybe dented. I had been too focused on Jake's awful driving to notice exactly when we passed it, but I knew I had seen it. I checked the map again. Still trees. If this was an unmarked road, I had no idea where it led. Deeper into the woods, I guessed. Farther from the main road. Farther from people. Farther from anyone who might notice if we vanished. The car bounced as we hit a tree root, pushing up through the dirt. The road was getting narrower now. The trees pressed close on both sides, their branches hanging low over the track. There was barely enough space to pull over and let another car pass, if another car somehow appeared out here. With Jake's window open, the gap between the car and the trees felt small enough for someone in the dark to reach in and grab him by the throat. A fallen tree lay half across the road ahead. Jake swerved around it, and I slammed against the passenger door. The movement felt strangely familiar. That was another tree in the road. Had there been a storm recently? I didn't think so. Autumn had been dry. Too dry. The kind of dry where leaves cracked under your shoes and the ground became hard as old bone. Behind me, Harry somehow found another bottle. He rolled down the window, leaned out, and threw the empty glass into the dark. It shattered against a metal post with a sharp crack. "Take that, Bankstown," he shouted, giving the sign the finger. I grabbed him around the waist and yanked him back inside just as a branch scraped across the open window. "Idiot," I snapped. "You're going to lose your head doing that." Then my brain caught up. Bankstown again? I leaned toward the window, trying to see the sign as we passed. How far does it say? Harry squinted lazily behind us. "Dunno," he said. "It's all scratched off." I looked out at the trees, and then up at the sky. The stars were visible in breaks between the branches. I couldn't read them. I wasn't one of those people who could look up and know which way was north. Still, it felt important to try. I remembered half-useless facts from survival shows. Follow the stars you know. Look at moss on trees. Moss grows on the north side. Or was it the south side? Did that even work here? "We should stop," I said. Malcolm sneezed into his elbow. "What?" "No, it's freezing. We're lost," I said. We'd been driving on the same road for 20 minutes. I could see Michelle's house from the main road when we arrived. Now all I see are trees. Do any of you remember seeing trees earlier? "No," Jake said slowly. His answer was quiet enough to make me look at him. He licked his lips. His face had gone sharper somehow, more awake. "I don't remember any trees at all," he said. Then, without warning, he brought his other hand back inside and turned the wheel. The car slowed to a stop. Harry opened the back door and dropped to his knees in the wet grass beside the road. I got out after him and patted his back while he gagged. His shoulders hitched once, twice, then loosened. Brown, nose-burning vomit spilled onto the ground. "Get it all out, mate," I said. Harry was usually our designated driver. That night, I guessed he had taken the chance to make up for all the drinks he normally missed. On the other side of the car, Malcolm muttered something about sick people making him sick. Then he walked away toward the trees, pulling his cardigan tight around himself. "I'm going to piss," he said. "I suggest you all do the same. We're not stopping again." I waved him off. "Thanks for contributing. Maybe when you're done, you can read the map if you're so cold." Jake stayed in the driver's seat, messing with the dashboard. The engine idled loudly in the night. "What the hell is wrong with the radio?" he said. Static hissed from the speakers. For a moment, I thought I heard something under it. Music, maybe, or a voice. Then it disappeared under another burst of white noise. Jake pushed buttons and turned knobs, but nothing helped. I ran a hand through my hair and pressed my palm against my forehead. These idiots. All of them had somehow decided I was the person responsible for getting us home, even though I had never been out here before. Jake was Michelle's friend. Jake was the one who knew the place. Jake was the one who had driven us in. He should have known the way back. "You've been here before, haven't you?" I asked him. His eyes stayed on the radio. "I don't recognize anything," he said. "I thought you knew where we were going." "I've been telling you I don't know where we are. You must have missed a turn." We left through the same gate. Behind me, Harry threw up again. The radio kept cutting in and out. Static, a warbled voice. More static. Jake pressing buttons. The motor idling. Cold air nipping at my fingertips. I pulled my hands into my sleeves and sat with the passenger door open, my feet resting on the dirt road. Ahead of us, through the trees, I could see another sign. The word Bankstown glowed white in the headlights. A long silver scratch marked the right side of the sign. I had seen that scratch before. The same sign. The same scratch. We were not just lost. We were driving in circles. A flock of birds suddenly burst from the treetops above us. Their wings beat wildly in the dark, and the sound made me flinch. I buried my face in my hands, trying not to panic. Jake and Harry were too drunk to help, and Malcolm was Malcolm. He was good at pointing out problems and terrible at solving them. Now he had wandered off alone to go piss in the woods like that was the smart thing to do. Then I heard him. Whoa, whoa, oh my God. I jumped to my feet. Malcolm came running back toward the car, one hand still trying to pull his pants right, the other pointing behind him. "There are people here," he gasped. "They were watching me piss." He threw himself into the back seat. "Get in. Go. Seriously, go." I grabbed Harry by the collar and dragged him upright. He stumbled and nearly fell back into his own vomit before I shoved him into the car. Then I turned toward the passenger side. Between two trees, I saw the head of an iron axe slide backward into the darkness. If it had just been leaning there, I might have told myself it was nothing. A tool left against a trunk, a trick of the headlights. But it had moved. Someone had been holding it. Someone had pulled it out of sight. Jake dropped the handbrake. I jumped into the passenger seat and slammed the door. Jake floored it. The car lurched forward, throwing Harry sideways in the back. The headlights swept across the trees. For half a second, they caught a large naked man standing on the side of the road. A dirty bag covered his head. He was completely still, just standing there, just watching us. A short, stupid laugh escaped me before I could stop it. We were on the wrong road, all right, the wrong road entirely. Go, Malcolm shouted. Go, go, go. Harry slid off the seat and got wedged between the front and back seats, too drunk to free himself. Jake kept his foot down. Dirt sprayed behind us. The car rattled like it was about to fall apart. I twisted around and watched the masked man shrink in the dust behind us. Just before the clouds swallowed him completely, I saw one of his legs move forward. I checked the map one more time. Now the GPS said we were in the middle of Yarnsby River. I put my phone away. The map was useless. All we could do was drive. The road had to lead somewhere. No, Jake said suddenly. No, he leaned toward the windshield. Bankstown again? That's the same sign. That is the same sign, Callum. Not the same kind of sign. The same exact sign. It has the scratch. Did you see it? No, I lied. I had seen it. I had seen it before too. Keep your eyes on the road. The radio popped. A wall of static blasted through the car so loudly my hands flew to my ears. Jake reached for the volume knob, but it kept turning loosely, spinning without doing anything. Harry threw up on himself in the back. Malcolm was on his knees, staring out the rear window. He's still there, Malcolm said. What? He's still there. He's not moving. He just keeps being there. Look behind the sign. I looked back in time to see the Bankstown sign vanish into the darkness. For a second, the ground caught the moonlight behind it. Something small flashed silver, a shard of broken glass, part of the beer bottle Harry had thrown out the window earlier. More bottles clinked together somewhere near his feet. Guys, Jake said. His voice had changed. Harry stirred in the back. What's going on? Malcolm shoved his head away so he could see out the windshield. Guys, Jake said again. When did we pass under a bridge? We didn't, I said. Then I looked ahead. A tall stone bridge crossed the road in front of us. It looked old, like something built long before cars, with a dark arch underneath where the road tunneled through a section of hill or mountain. The headlights lit the entrance, but the inside was black. That's new, I said. We haven't seen that before. The car jolted. My phone slipped from my pocket and dropped near my feet. Shit, Jake said. He turned the wheel hard. I was thrown against the passenger window. The car bumped into something, then rolled over it. Something soft. Something that lifted the car for a second before dropping it back down. Malcolm screamed from the back. We hit someone. We hit someone. Harry coughed and spat phlegm onto the floor mats. My head felt light. My face burned where the airbag had hit me. For a few seconds, I didn't even realize we had stopped. Then Jake's door opened. No, it did not open. It flew open, and Jake was pulled out. For one stupid moment, I thought we were saved. I thought maybe the police had found us, or paramedics, or someone from a nearby house who had seen the crash and was trying to help. Then Jake screamed. No. No. There was a wet crunch. Jake's body dropped beside the car. His head did not. It hovered in the air for one terrible second, held by something just outside my view. My hand flew to the door handle. Malcolm got his door open first. He stumbled out into the road, hands raised. We're sorry, he shouted. We're sorry. We didn't mean. The masked man turned toward him. Malcolm's words broke apart. He ran straight into the woods. He did not care about the cold anymore. He did not choose a direction. He just ran between the trees, disappearing into the dark like a frightened animal. I shoved my door open and dropped onto the dirt road. Behind me, Harry mumbled from inside the car. "Mate, we stopped for a piss, yeah?" Then came a sound. Thwump. Something small and round rolled against my shoes. I looked down and immediately wished I hadn't. I tore my gaze away, scrambled against the roots at the edge of the road, and forced myself to my feet. The archway loomed ahead of me. Beyond it, on the other side, stood another road sign. Not Bankstown this time. A new sign. Wauchope, 2 km. My knees ached from the crash. My face felt hot and swollen from the airbag. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I ran. "Somebody help." I screamed. The axe scraped against the pavement behind me. Slow, heavy, deliberate, like he was dragging it just so I could hear it, like he was spelling out the distance between us. I reached the shadow of the tunnel and plunged into it. The air inside was cooler. Damp, the walls swallowed the sound of my breathing and threw it back at me in broken pieces. The headlights from Jake's car cast long shadows across the stone, mine and his. I heard another thwump behind me. Then the back of my neck opened. Not a cut, not a scratch. It felt like something splitting. Heat spilled down my back. For one strange second, I thought of my father. He had raised chickens when he was a kid, and once he told me they could keep moving for a while after losing their heads. He said maybe they did not know. Maybe they could not feel it once the connection was gone. I could not feel mine. But I kept running. My boot twisted on a rock. I nearly fell, but somehow my next step found the ground. I ran through the tunnel, out the other side. A streetlight glowed over the Wauchope sign, warm and yellow and almost beautiful. I turned back because the light made me feel safer. The man with the bag over his head was gone. The tunnel behind me was empty. There was only Jake's car sitting crooked in the road on the other side, and what was left of Jake and Harry. Story 5. I have been working as a structural damage assessor for almost 10 years now. The job is exactly what it sounds like. When a building gets destroyed by fire, flood, a gas explosion, a bad storm, a collapse, or anything else that leaves it unsafe and broken, I am the person who goes in after everyone else has finished. The firefighters leave first. The police leave after them. The owners, if they are still alive, take what they can and go somewhere else to cry, argue, make calls, or sit in silence. By the time I arrive, the building is usually quiet. That is how I like it. I walk through the place room by room. I take photos. I check what is still standing and what is not. I look at walls, beams, floors, ceilings, and foundations. I write down what has failed, what might fail soon, and what can still be saved. At the end, I prepare a report for the county, the contractor, or the insurance company. My report decides if the building can be repaired or if it needs to be torn down completely. Most people think the job must be emotional. They imagine I walk through ruined homes and feel the weight of every family memory left behind. They think I see burned toys, broken dishes, family photos covered in soot, and empty rooms where people used to sleep, and that it must slowly eat away at me. Maybe it did at first. After 10 years, it becomes different. A destroyed building becomes a structure, not a home. I do not mean that in a cruel way. It is just how my mind learned to work. If I let myself think too much about what every room used to mean to someone, I would never get through a single job. So I stopped seeing children's bedrooms and kitchens and living rooms. I started seeing load-bearing walls, cracked joists, sagging beams, pressure paths, water lines, burn patterns, and the safest way through a place that might fall down on top of me. I go in alone. I come out alone. I write the report. Then I move on to the next ruined building. That was my life. I am telling you this because I need someone else to know what happened before I start doubting myself completely. The first house was in February. It was a gas leak. From what I was told, the leak had built up in the kitchen overnight. Then something sparked in the morning. Maybe the stove, maybe a light switch, maybe something small enough that nobody would have thought twice about it. The explosion tore through the kitchen and most of the ground floor. The back wall was gone. Cabinets had been thrown into the yard. The ceiling above the kitchen had bowed upward, then cracked open along the seams. But the upstairs was strangely intact. That happens more often than people think. An explosion follows the easiest path outward. It tears through doors, windows, weak walls, and open spaces. Sometimes the upper floor just sits there above the damage, exposed and smoke-stained, but still standing. It looks impossible to people who do not do this work, but I have seen it many times. I started on the ground floor. I documented the collapsed kitchen wall, the shifted support beam near the rear of the house, and the damage to the north load-bearing wall. The structure was in bad shape, but not unpredictable. I knew what I was looking at. After that, I went upstairs to check the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms. The first 2 were exactly what I expected. Smoke damage along the ceilings, cracked drywall where the walls had shifted from the blast pressure, furniture knocked sideways, a dresser tipped over in one room, a ceiling fan hanging at an angle in another, broken glass everywhere from the blown-out windows. Then I reached the 3rd bedroom at the end of the hall. I opened the door and stopped. The room was untouched, not just less damaged. Untouched, the bed was made neatly, with a dark green comforter pulled tight across the mattress. There was a nightstand beside it. On the nightstand sat a glass of water, an ashtray, a pack of cigarettes, and a lighter. The curtains were closed. The floor was clean. There was no broken glass on the bed, even though the window in that room had also been blown out. It looked like someone had stepped out for a moment and planned to come back. I stood there longer than I needed to, but at the time, I did not think it meant anything. Strange pockets of safety happen in damaged buildings. Fires skip rooms. Water finds one path and avoids another. Smoke stains one wall and leaves the other clean. That is why I write reports. Buildings do not always fail evenly. I took photos, noted that the room was structurally sound and the personal effects were undisturbed, and recommended a contents evaluation before demolition. Then I moved on. I did not think about that room again until March. The second house was on the east side of the county, in an older neighborhood full of narrow roads, mature trees, and homes that had been repaired too many times by people who were not professionals. It was an electrical fire. The fire started inside the walls and spread before anyone smelled smoke. By the time the fire department arrived, the first floor and most of the east wing were gutted. The west wing was still standing. I arrived in the afternoon. The house smelled like wet ash and burned insulation. The air was cold, but the walls still seemed to hold a faint memory of heat. I moved slowly through the west wing, checking the floor before every step. I documented smoke penetration, heat damage on the ceiling joists, and 3 soft spots where the subfloor had been badly compromised by water and fire damage. At the end of the hall, there was a bedroom. I opened the door. A made bed with a dark green comforter pulled tight across it, a nightstand, a glass of water, an ashtray, a pack of cigarettes beside a lighter. For a few seconds, I did not move. I just stood in the doorway with my hand still on the knob. Then I took out my phone and opened the photos from the February house. I compared them one by one. Same comforter, same dark green shade, same ashtray, same lighter placement, same pack of cigarettes sitting at the same slight angle, same water glass placed close to the back corner of the nightstand. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like my body understood something before my brain would allow it. Then I did what any reasonable person does when something impossible seems to be happening. I explained it away. Dark green comforters are not rare. Smokers keep cigarettes and lighters on nightstands all the time. Ashtrays are common. Water glasses are common. Maybe the same discount store had sold half the things in both rooms. Maybe older homes in the county had similar furniture. Maybe I was tired, and my brain was trying to make a pattern out of two unrelated rooms. Coincidence, that was the word I chose. I wrote the report, submitted the photos, and moved on. But I did not forget it. The third house came in April. That one was flood damage downtown. A water main burst and poured into one of those narrow 3-story buildings that used to be a business on the ground floor and apartments above. The ground level was ruined. The first and second floors had heavy water damage, warped flooring, swelling baseboards, compromised drywall, and mold already starting in corners where the air could not move. By then, I had almost convinced myself that the 2 green rooms had been nothing. I worked my way up the building, floor by floor. The stairs were damp and soft near the edges. The smell was terrible, that sour mix of wet wood, old plaster, and stagnant water. I checked the walls, ceiling joints, and floor stability. I wrote notes, took pictures, and tried not to think about February or March. Then I reached the 3rd floor. At the end of the hall was a bedroom. I knew before I opened the door. I did not want to know, but I knew. The room was there, the same dark green comforter, the same nightstand, the same glass, the same ashtray, the same cigarettes, the same lighter. But this time, something was different. The bed was not made as perfectly. The comforter was pulled up, but it was not tight. One corner had a small wrinkle. The pillow had a slight depression in it, like someone had been lying there not long before and had gotten up in a hurry. Not enough to leave the bed messy, just enough to show that it had been used. And the ashtray was not empty. There was a cigarette in it, half smoked. The ash was still intact, long and gray, clinging to the end like someone had set it down carefully and walked away before finishing. I do not smoke. I stood in that room for a long time. The rest of the building was soaked and rotting, but this room felt dry. Not warm, not safe. Dry, closed off from the damage around it. I took photographs from every angle. I measured the room. I checked the walls, the window placement, the distance from the bed to the door, the stain on the ceiling near the corner. Then I saw the wallpaper. I had not paid much attention to it before. It was an old, faded pattern, pale and tired looking. Near the window, there was a patch where the color was lighter, as if a picture had once hung there for years and then been removed. Near the door, the wallpaper had lifted slightly at the seam. I pulled up the photos from the first 2 houses. Same faded patch, same lifted seam. My hands felt cold. I went home that night and searched for the wallpaper pattern online. It took hours, but I found it. The pattern had been discontinued in 1987. The company that made it did not exist anymore. Maybe old wallpaper can show up in many houses. Maybe there were leftover rolls sold across the county. Maybe there was still some normal explanation. I tried to believe that, but I did not mention the room in my report. I filed the structural information only. I wrote about the damage, the floors, the drywall, the mold, and the risk of further collapse. I did not write that a room from 2 other destroyed houses had appeared on the 3rd floor of a flooded building. I did not write that a half-smoked cigarette was waiting in the ashtray like someone had just been there. I did not sleep well that night. The 4th house was in May. I almost did not go in. I sat in my truck outside the place for 15 minutes with the engine off and both hands on the steering wheel. It was a single-family home near the outer edge of the county. Residential fire. The roof had partially collapsed over the back half of the house, and the garage had burned hot enough to warp the frame. I had a job to do. That was what I kept telling myself. I got out of the truck, put on my gear, and went inside. The lower floor was bad, but manageable. I went through the motions: photos, notes, measurements, floor stability, wall separation, fire path, heat damage. I wrote in shorthand because my hand was shaking too much for anything else. Then I went upstairs. The hallway was narrow and blackened with smoke. My flashlight beam moved over cracked walls and hanging strips of insulation. There were 2 doors on the left, one on the right, and one at the end. I walked to the end. I opened the door. Of course it was there. The same room. The same bed, the same green comforter, the same nightstand, the same ashtray, glass, cigarettes, and lighter, the same wallpaper with the same pale patch near the window and the same lifted seam near the door. But this time, I did not look at those things first. I looked at the mattress. I know my own mattress. That sounds ridiculous, but anyone with back problems will understand. 4 years earlier, I bought a specific mattress after dealing with a pinched nerve that made it hard to sleep. I researched it for weeks. I compared models, read reviews, and spent more than I should have. It helped. I noticed the way it felt. I noticed the stitching. I noticed the shape of the corners and the label on the side. The mattress in that destroyed house was my mattress. Not similar. Mine, I stepped closer and lifted the corner of the sheet. The tag was there. Same model, same company, same manufacturing details. I took a photo of the tag with hands that did not feel like mine. Then I left the room, finished enough of the inspection to avoid raising questions, and drove home. The first thing I did when I got inside was go upstairs to my bedroom and check my own mattress tag. Same model, same manufacture date. For a while, I just sat on the floor beside my bed and stared at it. Then I went downstairs, poured myself a drink, and sat at the kitchen table until the ice melted. I told myself there must be thousands of those mattresses in the county. I told myself the same manufacturer probably made huge batches with the same date. I told myself I was tired, stressed, and starting to connect things that had no reason to be connected. But I did not believe it anymore. The 5th house was last week. By then, I knew before I even got the assignment. I knew there would be a room. I knew it would be at the end of a hall. I knew it would survive whatever destroyed the rest of the building. I knew something in it would be closer to me than the last time. The building was on the east side of Joski. It had suffered severe structural damage after a partial collapse. One side of it had folded inward, crushing the lower rooms and twisting the stairwell out of alignment. It was exactly the kind of job I would normally handle without much thought. but I sat outside in the truck for almost half an hour. I considered calling in sick. I considered telling my supervisor the building was too unsafe without even looking. I considered driving home and pretending I had never received the assignment. Instead, I went in. I documented the damage. I moved through the building carefully because it was genuinely unsafe. The floor dipped in places. The walls had separated near the corners. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and something sweet I could not place. Clover, that was the smell. It got stronger as I moved upstairs. At the end of the hall, there was a door. My hand rested on the knob for a long time. Some part of me still hoped I was wrong. Then, I opened it. The room was mine. Completely mine. Not close to mine. Not similar. Mine, the green comforter, was gone. The old ashtray and cigarettes were gone. The wallpaper was gone. In their place was my bedroom as I knew it. There was the landscape print my mother gave me before she died. I had kept it for years, not because I liked it, but because it was from her, and getting rid of it felt like throwing away something I was supposed to protect. There was the fitted sheet with the bleach stain from last summer, when I spilled cleaning solution and did not notice until laundry day. There was the same cheap lamp on the nightstand, the same scuffed corner of the dresser, the same little pile of coins and receipts I always meant to clean up and never did. Every detail was right. And the bed was occupied. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. Someone was lying on their side under the comforter, facing away from me. I could not see their face. The blanket was pulled up around their shoulders. One arm was tucked under the pillow in the exact position I sleep in when I am exhausted. I could see hair against the pillow. My hair. My build. My shape under the blanket. The room smelled like clover. I stood there in the doorway for a long time. I did not call out. I did not step closer. I did not take a photo. Something deep inside me told me that if I crossed the threshold, the figure in the bed would turn over, and I would see something I could never survive seeing. So I backed away. I closed the door very quietly. Then I walked down the hall, down the stairs, out of the broken building, and back to my truck. I drove home. I do not remember much about the drive. I remember stopping at a red light, even though there were no other cars around. I remember my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles hurt. I remember looking in the rearview mirror more than once, half expecting to see myself sitting in the back seat. When I got home, I did not go upstairs right away. I sat at my kitchen table until night fell. I kept telling myself to call someone. Dave, maybe. Dave has been my friend since college. He is the kind of person who would laugh first and worry second, which is usually exactly what I need. We were already supposed to get beers that Saturday. I thought about calling him early and asking him to come over. But what would I say? There is a room that keeps showing up in destroyed buildings, and now it has become my bedroom. There was someone in the bed, and I think it was me. I did not call. Around 11 tonight, I finally went upstairs. I stood in my bedroom doorway and looked inside. My bed was made. That was the first thing I noticed. I never make my bed. Never. Not neatly, at least. Some mornings I pull the blanket up halfway if I think someone might come over, but even then it looks lazy. The bed I saw tonight was made tight at the corners, smooth across the top, flat and untouched. The nightstand was clear. No charger cable, no glass of water, no loose change, no receipts, no book with a pen stuck in it, no clutter at all. The bleach-stained sheet was gone. The landscape print my mother gave me was gone. The mattress was covered with sheets I did not recognize, tucked so tightly that they looked almost hotel perfect. The room had no smell, no laundry detergent, no dust, no stale sleep, no trace of me. My bedroom looked like a room nobody lived in. It looked like a room waiting for someone. It looked like the room from the first house, untouched, like someone had just stepped out. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember what the room had looked like that morning. I could not. That frightened me more than anything. I know I slept last night. I think I slept last night. I remember waking up. I remember getting dressed. I remember drinking coffee in the kitchen, but I cannot remember getting out of bed. I cannot remember what sheets were on it. I cannot remember if the landscape print was still on the wall. I walked to the closet and opened it. My clothes were there, but they felt arranged wrong. Shirts hung in order, all facing the same direction. My shoes were lined up neatly. I do not line up my shoes. I never have. I checked the bathroom. My toothbrush was dry. The towel was folded. The sink was clean. I checked the laundry basket. Empty, I do not know where my things went. I do not know where I have been sleeping. I do not know how long I have been gone. The worst part is that nothing in the house feels broken. There are no signs of forced entry, no open windows, no missing locks, no muddy footprints, no clue that anyone came in and changed my room. It simply feels as if my life has been removed and replaced with a blank version of itself. I am writing this from my kitchen table. It is still 11 at night, though it feels like hours have passed since I first sat down. The house is quiet. Too quiet. Every few minutes, I think I hear something shift upstairs, but when I stop typing, the sound stops too. Maybe I am losing my mind. That is possible. Maybe 10 years of walking through destroyed buildings finally did what people always expected it to do. Maybe the rooms got inside my head. Maybe I started seeing patterns where there were none. Maybe I made up the mattress, the wallpaper, the cigarette, the shape in the bed. But the landscape print is gone. The bleach-stained sheet is gone. My bed is made. I am going to call Dave tomorrow. We are supposed to get beers on Saturday anyway, so it will not seem strange. I will ask him to come by first. I will make some excuse. I will ask him to look around, to tell me if the house feels normal, to tell me if I look tired or different or wrong. I think I just need someone to tell me I seem like myself. Because there is something I have not written yet. When I came downstairs after looking at my bedroom, I noticed dirt on the kitchen floor. Not much, just a few dry crumbs near the back door, like something had been tracked in and then mostly cleaned away. I bent down and touched it. It smelled like smoke, wet plaster, and clover. And when I stood back up, I saw a glass of water on the kitchen counter. Beside it was an ashtray, a pack of cigarettes, and a lighter. I do not smoke.